Imagine being 22 years old. You are weeks away from potentially becoming one of the highest paid college football players in the entire country. $5 million on the table. NFL scouts watching your every move. A program, Texas Tech, that bet everything on you. And then, in one single moment, the whole thing collapses. Not because of an injury. Not because you weren't good enough. But because of an app on your phone. That is the story of Brendan Sorsby. And it is one of the most wild, complicated, and honestly heartbreaking stories in college football in a very long time. Let's go back to the beginning. Brendan Sorsby was not always a star. He was a kid who loved football the way a lot of kids do, with everything he had. He got to Indiana University and spent his early years watching from the sidelines. Redshirting. Waiting. Hoping. That is the reality for a lot of college quarterbacks. You come in with big dreams, and you sit. You watch the starters get the glory while you carry clipboards and run scout team plays. And somewhere during that long, quiet waiting period, a habit started. It started small. A few bets here and there on sports. Nothing dramatic. You have to picture this, a backup quarterback, sitting on the bench, watching games, and somewhere in his pocket, a phone. Apps like FanDuel, Prize Picks, Underdog. All completely legal. All completely accessible. All designed, frankly, to keep you hooked. Sorsby would later describe it this way. He said it became a way of feeling connected to a team he could only watch from the sidelines. He was betting on Indiana games, the very team he was sitting the bench for, as a way of feeling like he was part of the action. That detail alone should stop you in your tracks. This wasn't a guy trying to cheat the system. This was a young man who was desperate to feel connected to the game he loved, and he found that connection in all the wrong places. And then the betting didn't stop. It escalated. He went from Indiana football to every sport imaginable. Basketball, baseball, tennis. And here's the part that tells you everything about how deep addiction can go. He started betting on Romanian soccer. Romanian soccer. A sport he had zero interest in. A sport he didn't even follow. That is not someone strategically gambling. That is someone who has lost control. That is someone chasing a feeling. That is addiction in its purest and most brutal form. Over 4 years, between Indiana and Cincinnati, Brendan Sorsby placed more than 9,000 bets. 9,000. Let that number sit with you for a second. That is not a few bad decisions. That is a daily habit. A compulsive routine. Roughly $90,000 in total wagers, using his own accounts, his family members' accounts, and even his friends' accounts to keep the betting going. He transferred more than $60,000 to a friend just to cover bets made on his behalf. He was 18, 19, 20 years old doing all of this. A college kid. A backup quarterback. Betting on his own team's games while sitting in the same building as those teammates. Now here is the critical thing to understand. There is no evidence, none, that Brendan Sorsby ever tried to manipulate a game. There is no evidence he used inside information to influence outcomes. There is no evidence he told anyone what plays were being called or what the team's injury situation was. He was not throwing games. He was not Pete Rose. He was a backup sitting in the stands betting on whether his team would cover the spread. Small bets. Some as low as a single dollar. The largest was $114. But it didn't matter. Because NCAA rules are clear. If you are on a roster, you do not bet on college sports. Full stop. And Sorsby had broken that rule thousands of times. Now let's fast forward, because this is where the story gets really interesting. Sorsby eventually transferred from Indiana to Cincinnati. And at Cincinnati, he transformed. He stopped being the backup kid on the bench and became one of the most electric quarterbacks in college football. In 2025, his final season with the Bearcats, he threw for 2,800 yards and 27 touchdowns. Just like that, he was a star. A legitimate NFL prospect. The kind of quarterback that programs spend years trying to recruit. So naturally, the transfer portal lit up around him. Texas Tech came calling. Head coach Joey McGuire and his staff put together a deal worth more than $5 million. $5 million. For a college football player. And Sorsby committed. He was going to be the face of Texas Tech football in 2026. He was ranked number 1 in ESPN's transfer portal rankings. Think about what that means. Out of every player in the country looking for a new school, Brendan Sorsby was considered the best of the best. But here is the thing about secrets. They have a shelf life. In late April 2026, just months before the college football season was supposed to kick off, the story broke. An online sportsbook had flagged suspicious activity. Law enforcement was involved. The NCAA launched an investigation. And suddenly, everything Brendan Sorsby had built was under a microscope. Texas Tech immediately announced he was checking into a residential gambling addiction treatment program in Arizona. A 35-day stay. And what came out of that treatment stay changed the entire conversation around this case. Sorsby was clinically diagnosed with a gambling disorder and an anxiety disorder. His attorneys argued something you do not hear very often in college sports. They said his gambling was not a moral failing. It was a medical condition, a mental health issue. And they argued the NCAA should treat it the same way it treats any other mental health condition, with compassion and with context. In his own written statement to the NCAA, Sorsby was remarkably honest. He said, and this is striking, that gambling became a daily habit. He said once he became part of the active roster at Indiana and had a real chance to play, he immediately stopped betting on Indiana games. But the gambling on everything else? That escalated. Tennis, baseball, NBA games, and yes, Romanian soccer. He wrote that what started small in high school turned into a compulsive daily habit that consumed him. His attorney put it this way: Brendan had an anxiety condition that manifested in compulsive gambling. He was using predatory and addictive online platforms, the same ones that the NCAA itself was profiting from through partnerships, to cope with anxiety. And the NCAA, his attorneys argued, was being deeply hypocritical by punishing a young man for using the very products the organization helped normalize. That argument landed hard. But the NCAA wasn't moved. The organization denied his reinstatement request. They said the rules are the rules. You bet on your own school's games. That is the line. Sorsby crossed it. And so his college career, they said, was over. Texas Tech appealed. And then things got even wilder. A judge in Lubbock County, Texas, granted Sorsby a temporary injunction. Meaning, a court told the NCAA they could not enforce their punishment. At least not yet. Sorsby was temporarily cleared to play for Texas Tech. Think about that for a second. A state court judge in Texas essentially told one of the most powerful governing bodies in American sports to pump the brakes. The internet went absolutely insane. Was Sorsby actually going to play? Was this going to work? But then came the counterattack. The Big 12 Conference filed in federal court asking for a declaratory judgment that they could issue their own punishment, regardless of what the state court said. State attorneys general from multiple states sent strongly worded letters. There were threats that if Texas Tech allowed Sorsby to play, the entire conference could take action. Scheduling bans. Sanctions. The works. Texas Tech was suddenly in an impossible position. They had a star quarterback they had paid millions of dollars to recruit, a court order technically clearing him to play, and an entire conference threatening to blow up their program if they put him on the field. On June 15th, Texas Tech blinked. The university announced they could no longer support Sorsby playing for the Red Raiders in 2026. They said there was no practical way to resolve all the various pending legal disputes and ensure his eligibility before the deadline. After everything, the money, the recruiting, the appeals, the court battles, Texas Tech walked away. And so Sorsby was left with one more door. The NFL. If he couldn't play college football, maybe he could skip straight to the pros. There is a mechanism in the NFL called the Supplemental Draft. It happens every year or so, and it allows players who have lost their college eligibility, for various reasons, to enter the NFL without waiting for the regular April draft. It is rare, but it exists. And Sorsby's legal team saw it as a lifeline. His agent was confident. He pointed to a guy named Keyshawn Bout, a Patriots receiver who had been caught placing thousands of bets while at LSU, including bets on his own team's games. Bout was drafted by New England and faced zero punishment from the NFL. If the league let Bout walk, why wouldn't they let Sorsby in? His agent was confident. He pointed to a guy named Keyshawn Bout, a Patriots receiver who had been caught placing thousands of bets while at LSU, including bets on his own team's games. Bout was drafted by New England and faced zero punishment from the NFL. If the league let Bout walk, why wouldn't they let Sorsby in? The logic seemed solid. There was precedent. There was a path. Sorsby submitted his application to the NFL for the supplemental draft on June 22, 3 business days before the deadline. He filled out the basic form, biographical information, 4 yes or no questions, a brief statement about why he was applying. His attorney says that when his team asked the NFL if anything else was needed, they were told no. Fill out the form and submit it. And then the NFL slammed the door. On June 23, 2026, just 1 day after the application deadline, the NFL announced it would not hold a supplemental draft at all in 2026. Not just that it was denying Sorsby's application. The entire supplemental draft was off. Cancelled. Done. The NFL's letter to Sorsby was pointed. It said his application, filed 3 business days before the deadline, without supporting information or documentation, and only after failing to restore his college eligibility through litigation, did not provide a basis for the league to make exceptions. The letter, signed by the General Counsel of the NFL Management Council, said Sorsby's petition did not demonstrate accountability for his conduct or indicate how he would adhere to the league's rules on game integrity. It also said, very clearly, that participation in the NFL is a privilege. And that privilege comes with responsibilities. Sorsby's attorney fired back immediately. Jeffrey Kessler, who is one of the most powerful sports attorneys in the country, called the NFL's decision a violation of the collective bargaining agreement and the law. He said the NFL never told Sorsby's team that applying close to the deadline would be a problem. He said all required documents were submitted. He said the NFL was moving goalposts after the fact. Kessler promised to pursue legal action immediately through the NFLPA. And so here we are. A 22-year-old quarterback who is about to be one of the most celebrated players in college football is now sitting in legal limbo with no team, no season, and a fight on his hands against both the NCAA and the NFL. The road forward looks something like this. If the courts do not intervene, and that is a long shot, Sorsby will not play professional or college football in 2026. He will be eligible to enter the regular NFL draft in April 2027. That gives him roughly a year to stay in shape, continue his recovery from his gambling disorder, and hope that NFL scouts still believe in his talent by then. And here is the thing. His talent is not in question. Scouts who evaluated him before all of this happened saw a legitimate starter. Someone with 31 college starts. Someone who could read a defense. Someone who threw 27 touchdowns in a single season at the highest level of college football. A 2027 NFL draft evaluation would likely grade him as a developmental prospect, valuable, but not a sure thing. And of course, being a year older with a year away from the game is never good for your draft stock. This entire story lives at the intersection of several massive, uncomfortable conversations that American sports is still trying to figure out. The first is sports betting and its relationship with athletes. The NFL, the NBA, the NCAA, they have all partnered with sportsbooks in recent years. They took the money. They ran the commercials. They normalized betting for an entire generation of young fans and young athletes. And now they are shocked that a 22-year-old with an anxiety disorder got sucked into an addiction that their own business partners helped create and maintain. The hypocrisy is real. Multiple people have pointed it out directly. It does not excuse what Sorsby did, but it is a conversation worth having. The second is mental health and addiction in college sports. Sorsby's attorneys made a bold argument: treat this like any other medical condition. And there is something genuinely compelling about that argument. If a college athlete struggled with alcohol or opioids and sought treatment, would we end their career permanently? The answer in most cases is no. So what makes gambling different when we have clinical evidence that it can create the same compulsive, brain-altering addiction as any substance? The third conversation is about power. The NCAA, the NFL, the Big 12, all of these organizations moved against one 22-year-old kid with enormous efficiency. Courts, letter campaigns, conference threats. It is hard not to look at all of that firepower aimed at a young man who never fixed a game and never stole a dime, and not feel at least some discomfort. None of that changes the rules. Rules exist for a reason. Game integrity is the foundation of professional sports. The moment fans believe outcomes can be influenced by players with gambling interests, the entire product loses its meaning. The NFL is right to protect that. The NCAA is right to protect that. But the way this story has unfolded, The whiplash of court injunctions and conference threats and last-minute application denials does not feel like a clean enforcement of clear rules. It feels like a young man being made an example of. And it feels like the people making the example are not entirely clean themselves. Brendan Sorsby is 22 years old. He has a diagnosed gambling disorder. He has completed treatment. He has not fixed a game. He has not destroyed anyone's life. And right now, he cannot play football anywhere in America. What happens next is genuinely unknown. The legal challenges are coming. The 2027 draft is a real possibility. A career in the NFL is not over. But the 2026 season, the one that was supposed to launch him into stardom, the one with a $5 million contract and the Texas Tech faithful and the NFL scouts with their clipboards, that season is gone. Lost to 9,000 bets, a phone screen, and a set of rules that neither the NCAA nor the NFL can apply without looking in the mirror first. Football has always been a game of second chances. The question now is whether Brendan Sorsby will get his.